Early one morning in June 1960, in the peaceful suburbs of Espoo, Finland, a man was walking around Lake Bodom, a place famous for its picturesque scenery, clear water, and fresh air. He looked for a fishing spot as usual. But just a few steps away, all the peace that this place once had was gone forever. On a grassy area near the lake shore, a tent was pitched in the middle of the quiet nature. But it was distorted, tilted, and torn, as if it had been torn apart by a wild animal. Inside was a sight that took the man's breath away. 3 teenagers lay motionless, covered in blood, their bodies piled on top of each other. A 4th lay outside, shivering and badly injured, almost unconscious. He immediately called the police. Hours later, the Lake Bodom area, once a picnic haven, became the scene of one of the most brutal and mysterious murders in Finnish history. The victims were Mila Ermeli Björklund, 15, stabbed multiple times. The most horrific death, Anja Tulikimäki, 15, died from head injuries and stab wounds. Seppo Antero Boiman, 18, Mila's boyfriend, stabbed and beaten to death. The only survivors, Nils Wilhelm Gustafsson, 18, Anja's boyfriend, who suffered serious injuries to his face and head, but survived. The 4 were close friends, camping overnight. They pitched tents, laughed, swam, and ate dinner by the fire, as thousands of Finnish teenagers had done before them. None of them had any enemies. No one ever thought a night in the wild would turn into a terrifying nightmare, and no one was ever caught in the 60 years that followed. There were no obvious signs of forced entry, no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon found, just a shattered tent, 3 bodies, and a young man still breathing, his eyes hollow and frightened. And from that moment on, the name Lake Bodom became a national obsession, a ghostly whisper recited in summer camps, classrooms, and newspapers, and to this day, no one is sure. Who killed those 3 teenagers in the middle of nowhere? And why? Ordinary Finnish teenagers, innocent, dreamy, living in the middle of the brilliant summer of youth. Before becoming cold numbers in forensic records, Mila, Anja, and Seppo were just. Mila was a girl with clear eyes, bright hair, and a laugh as clear as the water of Lake Bodom in the morning. She lived in Helsinki and was a middle school student. Her friends remember her as quiet, but always there when someone needed a shoulder to lean on. Mila dreamed of becoming a nurse. She often carried a small first aid kit with her when she went camping. She was always afraid that her friends would get scratched or bitten by mosquitoes. Even on the last day, she folded a clean towel to bring along as a habit. No one thought that the towel would be stained with her own blood. She was dating Seppo, a new couple, still clumsy but cute. Before going camping, Mila told her mother that she was only going for one night. "I'll be back early tomorrow," but she never returned. Seppo was a typical 1960s teenager, long, flowing hair, a lover of rock music, and a hobby of fixing his own bicycle. As Mila's boyfriend, Seppo was described as funny, kind, and had no problems with anyone at school. He had a small wooden guitar. He had brought it with him on several other camping trips to play for Mila. Seppo had joked that if he had not become an engineer, he would have been a Boy Scout all his life. He loved nature, swimming, climbing, and had a protective personality. Investigators believe that Seppo fought back fiercely during the attack, as his body had signs of injuries on his hands, as if he had used his body to shield Mila. Anja was Mila's best friend. They were in the same class and had dreamed of studying abroad in Sweden together the following year. Anja was smart, witty, and had eyes that seemed to laugh. Although she was a bit of an introvert, Anja was the one who kept the group organized. She prepared food, supplies, and divided the group work before the trip. Anja was dating Nils Gustafsson, the only survivor. Before the trip, Anja told her mother not to worry. we're only camping for one night, we'll be back before lunch." But by noon the next day, Anya's phone never rang. Nils was the only survivor of the tragedy. Anya's boyfriend, described by his friends as a gentle, calm person. When he was found, Nils had a serious head injury, a broken cheek, bleeding from his mouth, and was unconscious outside the tent. When Nils woke up in the hospital, he had no clear memory of what had happened. Or at least, that's what he said. For years, the image of Nils remained the strangest thing about the case, the only witness, alive after the horrific massacre, but with memories erased or hidden off for teenagers, just one night away from death, camping. They believed that nature was their friend, that the lake would reflect the stars, and that youth was something that could not be lost in a quiet night. They were wrong, and from the next morning, the name Bodom was no longer the name of a lake, but a symbol of sudden cruelty, of youth cut off, and of a mystery that would never be closed. June 4, 1960, began like any other Finnish summer day, clear, sunny, with a cloudless blue sky. For teenagers, Seppo, Mila, Nils and Anya were preparing for a short overnight camping trip at Lake Bodom, about 22 kilometers west of Helsinki. They had brought tents, snacks, soft drinks and some candy, typical teenage boys, eager to enjoy summer and their first love. Lake Bodom was the perfect picnic spot. The lake was nearly 3 square kilometers wide, surrounded by pine and birch forests. There were no resorts, no motels. Just green grass, chirping insects, and birds calling to each other at dusk. The group chose a flat area on the shore of the lake, about 500 meters from the main road, far enough to be isolated from the world, but close enough to turn back if they needed to. They pitched their tents, tied them securely, and went swimming together. A few nearby fishermen saw them, happy, healthy, no signs of anything unusual. At dusk, they had a snack, drank a few sips of wine, listened to music on a portable radio, and talked until late at night. A witness, a nearby fisherman, later testified that he had seen the boys in the tent around 11 p.m. Everything seemed peaceful. But somewhere, in the darkness between the trees, someone was watching them. No one knew his name. No one saw his face. No sound. No footsteps. Just the silence of nature, and a gaze that was not human. That night, it did not rain. The temperature was moderate. No one in the group sent a final message to their families, because there was nothing to foretell death. And then, between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. on June 5, something terrible happened. The tent was attacked from the outside. The tent fabric was torn from the side, with a sharp object like a knife or a sharp rock. The 3 teenagers inside were stabbed and beaten to death while they were still asleep, or had just woken up. There were no signs of a struggle. They may have been surprised in their sleep. Nils, the only survivor, was lying outside the tent, a few meters away, with severe head trauma and facial fractures. His condition was so vague that police could not be sure whether he had been thrown from the tent or had crawled out. Around 6 a.m., a couple passing by on a motorbike reported seeing the tent collapse, a blond man walking away from the scene, carrying what looked like a bag. They thought nothing of it and continued on their journey. It was not until nearly 11 a.m. that a passing fisherman actually discovered the scene and called the police. In just a few hours, Lake Bodom was no longer a vacation spot, but the scene of a triple murder, with no solution, no witnesses, no clear physical evidence. A peaceful night in the wilderness, and the next morning, blood dissolved into the lake water. The estimated time was between 4 and 6 a.m. on June 5, 1960, when the fog was still thick over Lake Bodom, when the forest was still quiet and the 3 teenagers were still sleeping in their thin canvas tent. Death quietly entered. No one heard a scream, no one raised the alarm, no one ran. Only one person, silently, decisively, and absolutely ruthlessly, tore the tent from the outside and delivered the first blows. Investigators later reconstructed the scene from what was left. The tent was punctured in several places from the outside. The killer attacked through the canvas, not opening the tent door, perhaps to maintain the element of surprise. Mila, Seppo's girlfriend, was stabbed more times than anyone else, showing signs of being dragged out of the tent. Her body was found alone, losing the most blood. She had been stabbed more than 10 times and had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to her head. Victims who were tortured more often were either personally targeted by the perpetrator or showed a particularly emotional reaction. Seppo and Anya, the other two in the tent, had also been stabbed multiple times and hit hard in the head. There was no sign of them running away. They may have been unconscious in their sleep, or killed too quickly to react. Nils, the sole survivor, was found lying outside the tent, with severe injuries to his head, face, and jaw. One of his shoes was found nearly 500 meters from the scene. This led the police to wonder, had he run away and been knocked down, or thrown away? Or had he done it himself? The murder weapon was never found, no knife, no stone, no stick. All the police had were traces of blood, some rips in the tent, and a few odd details. The group's transistor radio, gone. Not particularly valuable, but never found. Seppo's wallet was also taken, but other valuables were left. This raised suspicions about a motive for robbery. A strange shoe print, not matching anyone in the group, was found near the scene. But no one knew whose it was. The investigation found that the tent had been hit hard from the outside with a hard object, possibly a rock or a metal bar. The deep wounds and the force of the impact suggested that the killer was a large, strong man who acted quickly, efficiently, and in cold blood. What made the crime all the more chilling was not just the brutality, but the absolute silence. No one in the nearby camp heard a scream, no one saw a flashlight, footsteps, or a struggle, no trace. Fleeing, the killer came and went like a ghost. One theory was, did the killer know the victim? Was it a jealous murder? A madness from a wandering psychopath? Or was it a personal punishment, directed at Mila, and the other two were just witnesses who needed to be eliminated? Whatever the case, after that morning, the three teenagers were no more, and the only survivor couldn't remember, or didn't want to remember, what had really happened. Immediately after the crime scene was discovered, Finnish police launched the largest investigation in the country's history. Dozens of officers, investigators, and forensic technicians were dispatched to the Lake Bodom area. The entire country, which was peaceful and had almost no serious crimes, was shaken. However, from the very first hours, the investigation encountered serious obstacles. Before the forensic team arrived, many local police and residents had trampled on the scene, trying to help or simply out of curiosity. Footprints were crossed. Objects were moved. The tent, the most important piece of evidence, was pushed aside. The chance of accurately reconstructing the case was almost lost in the first few hours. At that time, Finland did not have a specialized forensic team. DNA did not exist. The ability to analyze the scene was rudimentary. They could only rely on testimony, intuition, and some rudimentary physical evidence such as shoe prints, the direction of blood splatter, and wounds. Nils Gustafsson, the only survivor, quickly became the focus. When he woke up in the hospital, he claimed he had no memory of what had happened. He said he had been in a deep sleep, had been attacked by surprise, and then lost consciousness. Doctors confirmed that Nils had suffered a facial fracture, a lacerated lip, severe head trauma, and signs of dragging. But strangely, these injuries were not commensurate with the severity of the attacks on the other victims. Suspicions began to arise. If the killer had attacked to kill everyone, why did Nils survive? Why was Mila, Seppo's girlfriend, the only one stabbed the most, as a personal target? However, there was no physical evidence to convict Nils, and he was still too stunned for further questioning. After several weeks of treatment, he was sent home. The police believed that he had suffered severe shock and temporary amnesia. However, public opinion did not think so. The whole country began to whisper, could it be Nils himself? A fit of jealousy? A quarrel between couples? A fight that went too far? Nils gradually became a byword for suspicion, for years, without formal charges. More than 4,000 people were questioned in the first 2 years after the murder. Among them, a few names stood out. A doctor at a Helsinki hospital said that on June 6, just one day after the murder, a man came to the hospital with disheveled hair, bloody clothes, and appeared to be mentally disturbed. When questioned, he screamed, rambled, and left before being identified. The man was later identified as Hans Assmann, a former Soviet spy who lived near Lake Bodom. The police questioned him, but found no concrete evidence. Later, on his deathbed, Hans is said to have implicated himself in the 3 deaths by the lake. But nothing was ever proven. A couple riding a motorbike past the lake at around 6 a.m. on June 5 claimed to have seen a blond man in a black shirt walking a few hundred meters from the tent. He was carrying a light-colored cloth bag. What it contained was unclear. But they did not take down the license plate, did not approach, and the police never identified him. Another man, who lived near the outskirts of Espoo, had been convicted of attacking campers with an iron rod. He had a history of violence and had been in and out of a psychiatric hospital. Police investigated but could find no connection to the Lake Bodom incident. Time passed. The investigation cooled. The case was closed in 1972, although no one had been charged. No trial, no verdict, but the wound did not heal. In 2004, 44 years after the murder, a shocking twist occurred. Nils Gustafsson, the survivor, was formally arrested and charged with the murder of his 3 friends. The case shocked the nation, and for the first time in nearly half a century, Lake Bodom was mentioned again, this time in court. On March 4, 2004, nearly 44 years after the shocking Lake Bodom murders, Finnish police announced that Nils Gustafsson, the sole survivor of the massacre, had been arrested and charged with the murder of his girlfriend Anya, along with his 2 remaining friends, Seppo and Mila. The whole country was shocked. Nils was then 62 years old, an ordinary man, working for a local transport company, retired, living quietly. He had never been charged with a crime, had never been arrested before. But the police believed that he was the killer. Investigators said that modern forensic techniques, especially DNA analysis, blood spotting and crime scene reconstruction, gave them reason to believe that Nils was the killer. Specifically, Nils's blood was found on the bodies of the other victims. Although he claimed that he did not move after being beaten, no one else's blood was found on Nils's shoes. Although he said that the attacker had attacked everyone, crime scene simulation experts say that Nils's injuries, although serious, do not bear the characteristics of a murderous attack but rather, self-inflicted in a panic or staged. In particular, it is believed that there may have been an argument during the night, possibly due to jealousy. A witness said that Seppo, Mila's boyfriend, had over-teased Nils's girlfriend earlier. Nils was said to have been angry, drunk, and lost control. From there, the police reconstructed a scenario. Nils, in a fit of jealousy and alcohol-fueled agitation, attacked the group of friends in a fit of rage, stabbing them repeatedly with rocks and knives. After the crime, he injured himself to pretend to be attacked, then lay unconscious outside. It was a bold theory, but was it convincing? In 2005, the case officially went to trial at the Espoo court. The trial was closely covered by the media. The whole country followed every development. Nils denied all charges. He said, "I lost my girlfriend, my best friend, my life, my reputation, and now my freedom. I don't remember that night, but I didn't kill anyone." The defense argued that it was logical that Nils would have blood on the victims, as they were in the same tent, with splatter wounds all over the place. There was no physical evidence of a murder weapon. There were no fingerprints of Nils on any of the objects that could be considered murder weapons. No one saw or heard anything. If it was a fight in a tent, how could all three have been killed so quickly? Furthermore, Nils's injuries were real, including a broken face, missing teeth, a swollen eye, a concussion, far beyond the point of self-inflicted injury. In October 2005, after a 9-month trial and 44 years of investigation, Nils Gustafsson was acquitted. The court stated, despite some doubts, the evidence is not strong enough to convict him beyond a reasonable degree. Nils was released. He refused to be interviewed, refused to write a memoir, and has remained completely silent ever since. Many breathed a sigh of relief, believing that an innocent man had been exonerated, but many, especially the victim's family, did not accept it. For them, Nils remains the strangest survivor in Finnish crime history. Espoo Criminal Court, Autumn 2005. Inside the courtroom, the cold wind outside could not compare to the tense and heavy atmosphere that hung over each row of seats. After 45 years, the 3 teenagers murdered by Lake Bodom were finally named in a criminal trial. But the irony was, the person standing in the defendant's chair was the only one who survived to tell the story. Nils Gustafsson, 62 years old, white hair, wrinkled face, sat silently in the courtroom. Behind him was the entire country, the international media, and most of all, the painful voids of 3 families that had never been solved. The prosecution's lawyer presented a psychological reconstruction of the case. Nils, drunk, jealous, and emotional, attacked his friends, then deliberately injured himself to create an alibi. They insisted there was no DNA from any strangers, and no signs of intrusion, all pointing to one person, Nils himself. The defense, on the other hand, countered, there was no murder weapon. There were no witnesses. There was no obvious motive. No one saw Nils leave the tent, or kill anyone, or come back to lie down. It was just a hypothesis, not evidence. They also presented medical evidence of Nils's injuries, showing that they were severe, most likely inflicted by a third party. Forensic experts confirmed that self-inflicted facial fractures, head trauma and tooth loss were very difficult, if not almost impossible. During the trial, Nils showed no signs of agitation. He just sat quietly, and when asked, he answered in short sentences, "I don't remember. I woke up, saw blood and darkness. I lost my whole world that morning." He cried only once, when a picture of his girlfriend, Anya, was projected onto a large screen. He bowed his head, gripped the arms of his chair, but made no excuses. On October 7, 2005, after nearly a year of trial, the court announced, there is insufficient evidence to prove that Mr. Nils Gustafsson is the perpetrator beyond a reasonable doubt. He is acquitted. The court orders the state to compensate the defendant for his mental suffering and legal costs. Some in the room cried. Some rejoiced. Some were silent. But no one applauded. There was no sense of victory. The victim's family disagreed. An aunt of Anya said, "We don't want him to be convicted. We just want someone to tell us what really happened. But the court can't even give us that. Nils left the courthouse, held no press conference, and has not been seen in public since. The Lake Bodom case is closed on paper, but in the hearts of Finns, it has never been closed. An acquittal does not mean an answer. A public trial does not mean justice has been served. The deaths of Mila, Anya, and Seppo, even after 6 decades, remain an unhealed scar in the national memory. A whisper that never goes away whenever someone camps by that seemingly harmless lake. Lake Bodom, more than 60 years after the murder, it is still there. The water is still clear. The surface is still calm every morning. Families still camp in the summer. Children still play by the water's edge. But for Finns, the name Bodom is no longer simply a place name. It is a symbol of suspicion, of unsolved crimes, and of collective obsession that has lasted for generations. The case has left its mark on almost every aspect of Finnish culture. Investigative books such as Mora Bodom and Jarvela, The Lake Bodom Murders, have been reprinted many times, becoming both a reference and a literary obsession. In 2016, a popular horror film called Lake Bodom was released, exploring the story of 3 murdered teenagers and the urban legend of the summer killer. Even a world-famous metal band called Children of Bodom was inspired by the case, carrying with it the dark and angry tones typical of the crime record. The name of Lake Bodom has entered the emotional lexicon as a metaphor for faceless crime and pain without a person to blame. The Lake Bodom case also left a profound impact on the way Finns think about safety, trust, and justice. Before 1960, Finland was considered a peaceful country, with almost no serious crime. Lake Bodom shattered that illusion. It made people realize violence can appear suddenly, in the most beautiful places, at the most unexpected times. It also pushed people into a deep obsession with the unanswerable question: what if we never know the truth? The next generation grew up with the story as a lesson in the imperfection of the legal system, of human memory, and of what we think is certain. Lake Bodom became a symbol of silence, a silence not because of secrecy, but because no one could say what no one was sure of. Nils lived the rest of his life quietly in Finland. He never appeared in public after the trial. No interviews. No books. No explanations. In 2020, he died at the age of 76, after a long illness. His funeral was small, sparse, and without media coverage. And once again, the question of the crime at Lake Bodom was plunged into darkness, this time forever, with Nils's death. All living witnesses disappeared, and the case, by law, cannot be re-investigated. Lake Bodom is now a place where people come for its beauty, but always shiver when they hear the wind blowing across the water at night. No one pitched a tent there alone. No one walked far from the main lawn, because everyone knew that place had been stained with the blood of 3 innocent young people, and the murderer, if not dead, was still living in some familiar shadow in the world. The case of the 3 teenagers murdered in Lake Bodom, Finland in 1960, did not end with a verdict, a confession, or an unmasking of the killer. It ended with a silence, so long that no one waited for an answer, but no one dared to forget. For more than 6 decades, the question who killed Mila, Seppo, and Anya has been repeated. Sometimes as a whisper in the night. Sometimes as an angry cry from families, journalists, police, scholars. And finally, as a question that does not require an answer, but still needs to be asked, just so the memory does not die. Because the truth is this: there are cases that do not have a clear ending, but that does not mean we cannot learn anything. The Lake Bodom case is proof that justice does not always come in the form of a verdict. It may come slowly, late, or not at all. But the quest for justice, regardless of the outcome, is how people affirm the dignity of truth. The Finnish police did not give up. Journalists, writers, independent investigators, local people, victims, and even suspects all contributed to keeping the flame alive. And if there is anything that makes the story more human than the tragedy, it is the effort not to abandon the dead. Mila, the girl who dreamed of becoming a nurse, gentle and careful; Seppo, the boy who loved the guitar and wanted to live in nature; Anya, the smart girl, loved her friends, loved beauty, loved summer. The three of them were not just victims. They were youth, innocent, unprepared for evil, and killed by it. They never reached adulthood, never went to college, never loved anyone else, never had families, leaving nothing but questions, and that is why continuing to tell their stories is the only way to keep them alive. Perhaps the scariest thing is not knowing who killed them, but accepting that we may never know. But in that acceptance, we learn something valuable, that the truth is not just a destination, it is also what keeps us from straying, that justice is not always punishment, sometimes it is just an admission, I have not forgotten you. And that even in the midst of endless tragedy, we can still live well, if we maintain kindness and the memory of what is right.